Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're really excited to bring to you another Ask Me Anything webinar with Joe Testani. Joe, do you mind, while everyone's joining us, do you mind maybe just giving a little background about who you are and your role at the university?
Sure. And good to hang out with you again, Danae, and everyone that's joining us. So I have two roles at the institution. I am the executive director and assistant dean within the college, and I run the Green Center for Career Education, so supporting all art, science, engineering undergraduate students and graduate students. My other role is in the provost office, associate vice provost for career education initiatives, and my responsibility there is coordinating with all the schools across the institution to think more critically and more strategically about how we can support students in their career education. What should they be doing in the summers? What can they be doing while they're in their degree programs? And then obviously, how are they transitioning to life after U of R and then continuing on as alumni? What kinds of services and career development they could participate in. So that's generally like my responsibilities in a nutshell.
Thanks, Joe. And for anyone who's not familiar with who I am, my name is Danae, and I work in the Green Center, and I assist with all things marketing and communications related. And like Joe said, we're so thankful to have you here today. And I see quite a few people have joined us, so that's so exciting. I know it's a hot one out there, at least here in Rochester. So it's fun to use this time on our lunch break to get together and talk about careers, right?
Yep.
All right. So, Joe, it's been a few weeks since we've last talked about this, at least, but I was curious if there's been anything that's been standing out to you and related in relation to the job market.
I think it's been so fascinating just to watch sort of things evolve over the last few months, since this all started back in February, March in the States. I think the last few weeks, I think the attention's turned to obviously this like rising stock market, jobs returning to some degree in some cities and areas, but then also the reversal of some of that based on some stay-at-home orders in certain parts of the United States, Texas and Florida, Arizona. So I think it's been more of the same in some ways, and that it's very volatile. And I think this is something that I remember, I think, Danae, you and I talked about this in our first AMA back in March about the volatility of what was happening around us. And that really hasn't dissipated. And I think some people thought that it would have dissipated to some degree by this point of the summer and that we would have settled into some sort of rhythm of some kind, but it really hasn't happened. And that's partially due to a lot of states sort of having different approaches to thinking about the managing the pandemic and managing sort of the decisions around reopening businesses and not reopening businesses. So I think we're seeing really odd numbers of like stock market increases and unemployment improving a little bit, but then certain sectors still doing well and continuing their hiring. I think of late, we've turned our attention to the fall recruiting cycle. And we've been thinking critically about how we're going to engage employers on campus or virtually this fall. And many of the employers that we're having outreach with are sort of contemplating what their schedule is and how they're going to interact with students in the fall. And some institutions are kind of waiting and seeing and developing their game plans for the fall. It's all going to be virtual. So it's going to be really interesting over the next few weeks, because I think that it was going to be some clarity around that. And obviously with some of the recent decisions within the administration in the United States around international students, and that obviously could have a significant impact on how institutions make some decisions around in-person or virtual. So it's been all over the place. I think I wish it was, I could say like definitively some things are clearer now and some things have been figured out. But we continue to see a lot of the volatility that was, I think, evident in the first few weeks of this pandemic, and continuing just with new information and new reasons for some of that volatility. But I'm happy to say that our team here in the Green Center and others around campus that are responsible for career education have spent a good deal of time planning and mapping out some strategies for the fall. And I feel confident that we're going to be able to provide a certain level of services and connections to students as this fall semester kicks into gear.
Awesome. Thanks for that recap, Joe. Some really great insight there. So, we have some questions actually coming in about the fall semester and what that might look like. And I know we've talked a lot about obviously taking precautions in regards to social distancing and having to wear a mask and all of those things. So, I would love it if you could talk us through a little bit based on what you know and what that might look like, even in regards to our office and the services that we'll be offering.
I think obviously the university is taking the approach of thinking about health and safety of students while still trying to provide a really robust academic experience to students. And I think the graduate students, especially those that are conducting research and hyper involved and have been staying in the city of Rochester, I think kind of helping them to return to as much of a normal as possible. And it's really going to vary based on discipline, right? Because I think certain disciplines in certain areas of the institution, like the medical center, will be operating in a very different way than maybe parts of the River campus or Eastman. So I think it's going to be school specific and discipline specific, because I think that's just what's warranted based on the type of work our graduate students might be doing and the type of involvement they might have. On the undergraduate side of things, and those students that have more of a residential experience on campus, the next few weeks I think will be really important, because I think there's going to be some clarity provided in terms of expectations for students around wearing masks and appropriate PPE and social distancing on campus. And many of the folks on campus have been working diligently to um, go through all the classroom and open spaces on campus and reformulate what it looks like in a social distance way. So if a classroom had a certain capacity prior to COVID, what that new capacity might look like. So that's going to be really helpful for faculty as well as for students to understand what spaces they can navigate and participate in and utilize for different things, and while maintaining some safety standards. As it pertains to our office and some of the other offices around the university, whether it's in the Simon School Career Management Center or the Eastman or School of Medicine, Dentistry, or Warner, most of those services from career education perspective will be offered all virtually, mostly because of social distancing, right? One-on-one advising is probably not going to be tenable, but we'll have a full slate of services available for students to participate in. There'll be some new self-directed videos and resources available on our website that students can access, at any time, just to kind of learn more and kind of hear from folks. And this format, as an example, I know Danae records these and posts them so students can review them at later dates and see if there's nuggets of information that might be useful. But most critically, we're going to be involving and engaging with a lot of alumni and employers to be available virtually, and so students can network one-on-one as well as in groups with some of these folks. And we're currently about to embark on a campaign with our alumni and parents and other parts volunteers to really step up and figure out ways that they can be involved in helping current students navigate the current job market, but also just decisions around what to do for next summer, to do during the academic year, and as well as thinking about jobs or graduate school if they're, for those that are graduating or moving on to something else after their degree programs are completed. So I'm, I think, I feel like we're prepared. We've been working on this for the last few months, and many of the offices that support students in this area have been working on this for the last few months to create a robust suite of services. But I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities to connect with people one-on-one, as well as through some programming and workshops and networking opportunities, which I think is going to be really key and to help students stay on top of some of these processes and some of their timelines for opportunities.
Yeah, I definitely think it sounds like it's going to be a really interesting semester, and especially going into 2021, it really does seem like COVID-19 is not going away, right? So, in anticipation for what's to come in the next year, what advice do you have for returning students who are interested in pursuing an internship next summer? How should they be using their time?
I think it's a great question, Danae, and I think one thing I think you and I have talked about and we've shared on these platforms before is students are going to be experiencing these things firsthand. And I think the more feedback they provide us as they go through the rest of the summer and the semester is going to be really helpful to us to create new opportunities or programs that might really be more aligned with some of the needs that students have. So we talk to students all the time. We have students that work in our office that we tap into. But what's going to be key is a lot of that cycle of feedback, because I think we're going to continue to iterate and prototype and try different things throughout the academic year to really meet students where they're at as this thing continues to evolve. I think in terms of directly answering your question about what students can do to prepare and maybe position themselves, I think it's going to vary widely by industry, right? So students that might be interested in computer technology, IT, thinking about like software development, software engineering, finance, consulting. For juniors that are going to be juniors in the fall, those industry sectors typically are very early in their recruiting cycle. So they'll be recruiting actively in the fall. So being really active and participating in a lot of the events that we offer, but also utilizing some of the resources that we have to reach out to alumni and others that are wanting to engage and help students navigate, prepare for interviews, really kind of review their resumes, talk about things that they've done in the summer or last 6 months, and really kind of crafting their story for how to articulate like how COVID's impacted them and how they've responded to that. Those are going to be really critical things up front that some of those students can do. And we have the rest of the summer to work on some of those things. And so it's like we still have all of July and August. And so I think there's ample time for students to have those conversations now, continue to think about ways to add more skills to their skill set, do some learning, whether it's reading different texts, networking with folks. And today you can put the link into the summer opportunities page. I think it's always helpful to kind of showcase the compilation of resources and programs that we have over the next couple of months that I think students can still take advantage of. So I don't want us to think like the summer's over and now we have to get ready for the fall. There's a lot of activity that can still happen over the next 6 weeks that I think might be really beneficial to position students for the internship process. And that goes for master's and PhD students as well. I think, opportunities for master's students for internships as well as PhD do exist. And I think the same tips would apply to them. What are you doing right now? What skills are you building? Are you networking and engaging with others? Are you doing research to see where you could apply your background and skills to? I think are all going to be critical pieces of activities. Now, for those students whose internship cycles may be later in the academic year, still doing some of the same things I've mentioned, and you just have a longer time frame to be able to work on those things. And so I think you shouldn't just wait until later because you're maybe a later start to your hiring cycles. So areas like nonprofit or social good, healthcare sector in terms of like really direct service and working on the ground or front lines in the healthcare industry. Thinking about the more creative industries, which tend to hire just in time versus way in advance in terms of their hiring. I think it's important to be active in those areas and maybe even see what kinds of part-time gigs or projects you can work on with each other or your courses, additional ways to build experience. I think those are going to be critical things to participate in and do over the coming weeks and months.
Yeah, one thing that you said stuck out to me was about how to like set yourself apart during this time when obviously we're seeing a lot of more like freelance opportunities are starting to appear, and people are really trying to figure out how to make their resume and their experience stand out so that they can get hired and secure the job, right? So I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about personal branding.
Sure.
I've seen a couple questions in the past where people have asked, well, how do you position yourself in a way that's favorable to these employers, right? And I think that's something that you've done really well with your own personal brand. And I'd love it if you'd be able to give maybe a few tips or tricks that you've learned along the way that's helped you.
Sure. I think it's a great question. And this is really individualized. I think it can be, because I think each person has to think about like, what do they want to showcase about themselves? At the end of the day, it's a competitive landscape for internships or jobs out there. Most students, especially if you go to schools like U of R, you all do well academically, you have maybe similar scores or GPAs. So a lot of that gets thrown out. And what it starts to come down to is, how do you articulate or demonstrate that you actually possess certain skills? So over the last few years, I think it's become easier and easier for students to actually participate in activities to demonstrate skills that they have. And I think in U of R in particular, we have courses and programs and projects that students can participate in to actually showcase that. So, and if you don't have those things in your courses, what can you do? And I think this is an opportunity to be creative. It could be as far as like starting a company. It could be going on some of these platforms that we've identified and doing micro internships or small time project-based work that might take like maybe 10 hours or 20 hours to do. Creating a website, creating a strategy or game or marketing plan for an organization, rewriting copy, for those students that are really strong in writing, and things of that nature. How can you practice that writing and maybe do it for a nonprofit organization, or even if you're working on campus in an on-campus job, how do you showcase the skills that you think are really, that you do really well, but maybe haven't been able to demonstrate as much? So I think it's taking advantage of no opportunity is too small. I think sometimes we think of things in extremes, like I have to get a job or have an internship to demonstrate that. I think that's changing a little bit. I think showing more micro ways to do that. It could be a project that lasts a week, but what you're doing is demonstrating a skill set and application of those skills. And that really becomes critical, I think, in being able to tell a story to an employer. I think for me, over the last few years, I think it's something that I'm very conscious of, and I take time to think through what I can do. So writing pieces on LinkedIn, writing articles and showcasing that I have this background, but I'm also giving advice and helping other people out. That's important to me, and I've taken some time to be able to do that. Participating in events or programs where I'm building my network, and also learning what's trending in my industry, right? So I think it's being knowledgeable, because if I don't understand what some of the problems are or some of the issues are that are facing, let's say, higher education, or specifically like the work that I do in helping students connect to jobs and internships, it can't really be helpful to students, and helpful to them to understand what's going to come down the road for opportunities, or what might be trends that are impacting the future of work. So staying on top of what's trending in the different ways and different forums is really kind of a key thing that I've done to make sure that I'm current on what's happening, but also anticipating how that translates to students. Well, to me, if you're wanting to get into a certain industry sector or solve a kind of problem, you want to be as well versed on that problem as possible, and always learning what's sort of changing in that space. So that's something I think that students have a lot of control over, being well read, talking to people, and learning more about what factors are impacting that industry, that profession, or the problem it is that they're trying to solve. Something like AI. Right? If you're interested in AI, what's the new technology that's coming down? Who are the major players in AI? What are some of the regulations that are coming from the government to support AI or monitor, AI? What are some of the things that are different in different countries around the world? What are the different applications of something like AI? These are all really interesting questions that if this is something that you're interested in, how well read can you be to be able to do that? And the last thing I think is what I've tried to do is practice as much as I can some of the skills that I think are really relevant to my career, and continue to do more of that. And that's volunteering for stuff on campus, whether that's a committee or a project, or even helping out friends at other institutions to maybe facilitate a workshop for their team. So that allows me to practice and talk through some of these ideas, and also get more experience, let's say, facilitating or leading a strategic planning effort. So those are some of the things I think I've done, but how they might translate to some of the students. Sorry, I know that was long, but I was kind of going through different sort of pieces of the equation.
Yeah, no, I think that makes perfect sense the way that you explained it. And thank you for diving deep into that because I think what you said, there's a lot of great information there. And we actually have a question coming in regards to graduate students. So it
Can we,
says, what?
before we go to that, Danae, can we?
Yeah.
I like you to answer that question too about kind of positioning yourself because I think you're much younger than I am, and I think your industry sector I think is very much predicated on like technical skills in some ways.
Hmm.
So how have you kept up, I guess, on some of the skills you think you need to be positioned well for maybe like another job down the road, after the current one you have or are continuing to grow?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Joe. So, from where I'm sitting in regards to marketing, um, in the last few years, we've really seen a surge of digital marketing, right? So, I'm keeping tabs on a lot of different things in regards to like any sort of Google certifications that are available, whether it's some of the ads that they have in their ad center or even SEO type of certifications. And then when you think about social media, I'm looking into any sort of education based courses I can take for any Facebook marketing, Instagram marketing, anything related to Twitter. Especially then when you think about how you're then positioning yourself online. I try to take a very professional approach with any of my social media profiles, which I think everyone should do as you reach a certain age, right? That should be top of mind. Like you don't want to post ridiculous things that can then hurt you down the road, right? I think um, I'm a big fan of YouTube, and there's been a lot of controversy lately, and even on Twitter with a lot of things that people have posted in the past, which is now coming back to haunt them. So I really try to keep a close eye on kind of what's circulating in the media. How can that affect then the marketing standpoint? Because when you're in marketing, you really try to hit on those what's trending now, sort of like you were saying. Like I'm looking to see what sort of marketing tactics are trending, what's working within different industries, and then I scale it back and I do a lot of benchmarking in regards to higher ed. So those are some things that I do as best practices from where I'm sitting in marketing. But then, like I said, with just your social media presence, that's something I would say anyone in any industry should keep an eye out. And then activity on LinkedIn, I think, is huge.
I think it's going to be particularly critical this fall.
Yeah.
Right now, in this really like the whole next 12 to 18 months, because so much of the things that we probably would have done in person are going to be
Mhm.
virtual. In particular, building relationships, networking, connecting with others. Your brand online will become even more important in this process. So I think it's such a good advice. Take time to do um, a social media inventory for yourself
Yes.
and kind of look at your profile, look at the information. Does it showcase and exemplify the things that you think are important, and also the kind of skills you want to portray to potential recruiters or people in your network? I think it's taking a hard look at that, and LinkedIn in particular, from a professional standpoint, um, is most important. And you know what, I honestly, I was doing this actually this week. I was going on friends and colleagues' LinkedIn pages and looking at how they've been describing themselves, especially
Mhm.
they've changed that over the last few months, um, because of things that have happened with the pandemic or things that have happened with Black Lives Matter. Are they adding things? Are they changing the way they talk about or showcase themselves? So it's something I regularly do, and I think it's really important for students in particular, to really take a hard look at that, because so much of these interactions are going to be really virtual and predicated. And I think LinkedIn's going to be, and then Handshake to a degree, because I think Handshake, more and more recruiters will probably use Handshake this year as a way of sourcing talent, even more so than they've done in the past.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think we'll see in the months coming that more and more people, like you just said you did this weekend, like they're going to be looking at their social media sites much more closely. And we might even see how traditionally these sites have been used. We might see how they're going to change just due to everything going on, right? And I can definitely anticipate seeing some big changes there. Like I know even there's a lot going on in regards to the Facebook community and ads that they're allowing. And I think we might see a lot of work happening. And I'm excited to see how it all plays out. But yeah, so those are definitely things that I think everyone should just keep an eye on, right? And really just monitor how things are going. And I think it's great advice what you said, to look at colleagues to see how they're positioning themselves, and just kind of, it never hurts to do some little research, I guess you could say. I don't want to say compare, but you know what I mean.
This is a market analysis. That's
Yeah, there you go. Benchmarking.
sorry, go back to your question set from for regarding graduate students.
Oh yeah. Okay. So let me pull it back up. Can you talk a little bit more as to how I, as a graduate student, can get more involved outside of my academic department, and how to communicate that to a department that very much highlights the importance of research, publication, and development within my research area specifically?
Oh, that's a good one. I think part of it depends on what the end goal is, right? If the end goal is to work in academia, I think this is very much my personal opinion. If you are a PhD student that wants to work in academia, or even an undergraduate that has aspirations to work in academia, work in a college university, either in the United States or elsewhere, I think it's going to be critically important to understand how universities work, the business of running an institution. Because as a faculty member, or potential faculty member, it's it's important, obviously, to be very well versed in the research area that you have, and that's going to be your primary value that you bring to an institution, your teaching and your research. But I think increasingly it's going to be important to understand the rights you have, the how decisions are made in institutions. So any networking that you can do throughout the university to learn from deans or provosts or other senior administrators and non-academic units, like dining services or housing, something like that, is really important. Because I think, and that could just be like having a 20-minute conversation with someone to understand where they sit in an institution and how decisions are made within that organization. So I think it sounds really simple, but I think it's really critical if if PhD students in particular have aspirations to work in academia and want to be a faculty member or an administrator. So exposing that, as I think that will give insight then to what skills might be really critical, and then inform the second piece of that is getting experiences. Maybe it's writing, maybe it's putting together and writing differently, like writing for the purpose of presenting an idea in to maybe change a policy in an institution is different than writing a research paper, right? Typically, it's much shorter, and so you're kind of bulleting out the critical points that are necessary to make a decision, or to help inform people that are making decisions. So I think that's thinking through and learning the nuance that's involved in that. For those folks that want to go into industry, right? It's kind of, and this I think applies to undergraduates too that have been very research focused. The critical thing is, how does that translate to industry and in a non-academic setting? What can you do? And part of it is repackaging and reframing the experiences that you have, and how that could apply to an industry sector. And I really think this applies to any PhDs at the institution, whether it's humanities or hard science or engineering. It all lies in the ability to translate and to summarize and help the end user, the person that you might be interacting with, communicate what you've learned into the language that they understand and how it's relevant to their industry, right? I think and I think that responsibility does reside with students, PhD students or undergraduate students. You have to kind of put yourself in the position of the end user, and think about how to take what you've done and translate it for them. You can't expect that they'll understand or make that inference or make the connection. You have to provide that guidance to them in some degree. So it's taking some time to reflect. It's learning and listening to other people and how they've done that. It's working with advisors, whether that's in your department or with people in our office, and talking to alumni that have PhDs that went to work in industry, alumni that have PhDs that went to go work in academia. So those are really critical pieces, because I think there are opportunities around campus that you can volunteer your time to help with something, because you're a really strong writer, you're really strong analytically, and maybe you can work on a data project for an office that might need some support. So there's different ways to do that, almost like the gig economy we talked about today, of doing that in a microcosm on campus. Sometimes it's a paid opportunity. Maybe it's a project that you can work on for a couple of weeks that you can analyze some data. But the only way you learn about those things is to start actually talking to people and engaging people on campus and being curious about other things outside of your unit so that you can see what kinds of things you can develop or what kinds of things you can participate in order to build up your portfolio or your background in order to be able to translate that. So it's a process for sure, but I think there's different nuanced ways to be able to do that.
Absolutely. That was a great answer, Joe. Thank you.
I'm saying, I try. I aim to please, Danae.
So we actually have a question coming in regarding a topic that you have addressed before, but I am curious a little bit if your thoughts on this has changed at all since obviously when we first talked about it was way back when, maybe in like March, April. So it says, hey Joe, back in the '08 recession, many people recommended that it was a good time to go to grad school as the market recovered. Do you still see this as a similar trend this time around?
To me, this is a very individual thing. It depends what kind of degree, it depends what industry sector, it depends on what your interests are. I'm not, this is once again very much my opinion, I'm not a big fan of just going to grad school to avoid going into the job market. I don't always know if that's necessarily the best thing, especially if you're incurring more debt to do that. If you have an opportunity to have someone else pay for your further education and there's something you want to learn and you think that's going to add skills to your portfolio, yeah, I think that there's some validity to that decision. And I think this in particular, I think is a challenging question for international students right now, because I think some of our international students, the prospects around finding job opportunities in the States because of some of the regulation changes around, H-1Bs and OPT, because some of the just the general environment that employers have, because some of the decisions of constricting, being more conservative with hiring around international students, that may be a very valid decision because some of those scenarios are outside of your control, and it might be smart to look at graduate programs as options. Now, that being said, I would take care to think through which master's or PhD programs might make the most sense, because those are commitments. You're investing in something, and I think those are much like when you made a choice to come to get a bachelor's degree at the University of Rochester. There's certain reasons you chose U of R, right? And I think that still applies to folks that are thinking about further education, whether that's a postdoc, a PhD program, master's, a second master's, a bachelor's student getting additional certifications. It's really very individualized. It's very much tied to your interests and some of these other factors that may be out of your control, like the state of affairs or the economy in the United States, and the general feeling towards certain populations and how that might impact some of those decisions. So I don't take that lightly, and I think that's something that you have to source insight from your family, from advisors, from alumni that might have made those types of decisions, and obviously, people within my team or other units to help you navigate that and really balance some of the factors that go into that decision, because there are ramifications of that, right? Financially, potentially, but also time. So I think that's never a light decision. I typically don't blanket it as saying like, don't go get a graduate degree in a recession, or everyone should get a graduate degree in a recession, because I think it is so unique, and there's so many different factors to weigh individually. But I think there are some amazing programs that U of R offers, that are master's degree programs for undergraduates, that if you did a fifth year, it really would boost and enhance your profile, and be valuable in the marketplace. And others that maybe doesn't have a lot of relevancy to the marketplace, or it might not be as important to you because that might not be maybe an industry path you want to go down. So it's really taking care of that. It still comes back to the same thing that we've talked about in these sessions today, and we've mentioned today. It's about your story and how does this all fit together? How are you able to convey the value of this additional degree that you have, and why it was important to you, and why, maybe more critically, it's important to the employer that you're applying for the job with, like, because that at the end of the day, you have to convince those people that these additional credentials that you have actually have value to them as a hiring manager. That's a key thing, and I think that's an important part of the equation to think about. And master's degrees are much faster, so they're maybe either a year or 15 months or 2 years. So the turnaround time is much quicker. And so will you gain enough value out of those that might yield a return on that investment?
Thanks, Joe. I think that makes a lot of sense what you said based on that. And like I said earlier, we have talked about it before, and I would have to agree with what you're saying. It definitely will depend on individual situations and what they're really hoping to get out of it by going back to graduate school, right? So we actually have a couple more questions that I'm hoping we can get to in the last few minutes, but I just want to remind everyone who has joined us today. I have put a couple links in the chat that will direct you to some other remote and virtual internship opportunities, as well as some other summer opportunities. So those are in the chat for you to check out. And I did want to remind you that we will be having another AMA in a few weeks, so stay tuned to that. Most of our events and opportunities are also shared on our Facebook page. So if you haven't liked our page already, it would be awesome if you did. I can put that link in the chat as well. But Joe, like I said, we have a couple more questions I'm hoping we can get through in the last 10 minutes. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, this one's a little long, so bear with me, okay? All right, so if more research programs and internships are going to be focused on COVID, understanding how the virus works, and possibly finding a vaccine, will that negatively impact research that's focused in other disciplines, such as funding, availability for students, demand, etc.? Will the focus on COVID and research and internships make it harder to find opportunities in other fields or disciplines? Could funding be limited as well?
And I guess one question I would have then is funding from whom? Like if we're talking about like
Sure.
government funding, research funding, I I think some research at the university, we'll take U of R as the example, have definitely been diverted to thinking about how do we solve this COVID issue. But there's research at the institution that's cancer research or Lou Gehrig's disease research or other type of research that's happening at the institution. Those will resume if they've even been paused, right? Because those still remain significant issues that impact so many parts of our population. We're talking about like science research in particular right now. But I think this is the beauty of working in a university and responding to challenges or problems that might be facing our country, our world, and our society, right? It's going to pivot and be responsive to these kinds of issues right now. And so will funding resume into those other areas? Yeah, I think, but it's one of those things that we have to figure out and solve this problem because the ripple effect on all these other parts of our society or industry are so vast, right? People can't actually return to work if we don't figure out some of these, how to deliver, the vaccine, how to create a vaccine, how to deliver it, and so on and so forth. And that has permutations in so many, if you think about it in a supply chain sort of way, has so many impact, and there's research happening in all parts of that supply chain. So it's not only this biological and scientific research of a vaccine, it's the delivery of that, delivery in terms of like the biomedical piece of that, but it also is thinking about the societal impact. How do you get and mobilize, maybe change habits that are happening in the communities so that people don't get this in the future? How do you prevent a pandemic from happening again? What's the business piece of this and how organizations make money off of these things, and what's that business prop, or the other side of that, the social responsibility piece of it. So I saw Danae put in the chat the coronavirus challenge that we're running, and these are exactly the types of questions that you have a chance to participate in and join the conversation to think about solutions. So if I'm understanding the question right, I think research is going to be diverted. I think there's plenty of internships and plenty of industry sectors, but I think you'd be remiss if you didn't think through how the pandemic is impacting different industry sectors. How does it impact social media? How does it impact working from home? How does it impact sustainability, nonprofit sector, finance, consulting? So there will be an attention that is given to this, mostly because those industries are trying to figure out how to respond to that. So I don't think it'll divert all the attention and all the money away from other sectors into this until it's solved. But there'll definitely be a shifting of resources in order to solve it because it's so debilitating to the way we have to do work in so many different areas. I think that addresses the question, Danae. Do you think that does, or is there other parts of it that you think are relevant to try to talk to?
I think you got everything. I think you did. I think you hit upon it really well. So
Feel
we
free
only
to ask that question. Sorry, Danae. Feel free to like follow up with me afterwards because I think
sure.
that it's an interesting question, and I think one that we have to monitor and see. And I think that part of it's dependent upon how long this goes. You know,
Yeah.
if we find a vaccine in the next 3 months, like, well, that's a game changer. But if it's going to probably be into 2021, which is more likely, yeah, I think we have to figure that out because I don't think we can return or resume normalcy until that happens to some degree.
Absolutely. I do agree that there's probably a lot of different variables that are going to play a role in that. But I think you did a great job at answering it.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So let me go back to our questions. I think the last one for today will be, what advice do you have for a first year coming into this type of environment? Should I stay focused or keep my options open? And I'm assuming when they say that, they mean their anticipated career choice and pathway.
Um, for a first year student, I think my general, regardless if COVID was happening or not, my general perspective is that as a first year student, you should always remain curious.
Mhm.
So I think you can have goals and targets of what you're trying to do. But the point of coming, especially coming to a place like U of R, is that you have an opportunity to be curious about a variety of things, to take courses in those, talk to people, experience so many different things, and you should lean into that as much as possible. And I think the pandemic hasn't changed my perspective on that. I think it's just exacerbated the emphasis of that, is that you should continue to remain curious. Um, like I said, having goals, but thinking about all the different things you can continue to learn and understand. And also, depending on what your goal is, thinking about all the different perspectives to look at that. So if you want to be, let's say, if you want to work in the finance sector, um, what do we think how is that going to change over the next 4 to 5 years? Like legitimately, how is that sector industry going to change that profession? How do we manage money and how do we distribute money? How do we think about wealth and companies merging and like because there's a lot of things that are happening in that space even before COVID. So how is that going to evolve? That's something you should be curious about no matter what. And it's not about like, I'm going to be a banker in 4 years because that job is going to change drastically in the next 4 to 5 years.
Mhm.
I think you could take any profession. So if it's software engineering, well, that's going to evolve and change because I think, like you mentioned, you know, people might want to work remotely now because they can. They might not want to work for Facebook because they don't believe that Facebook maybe protects privacy, and maybe that's not a value prop that they want to get behind. So those are differences that might like require you to be curious and see where some of these things will evolve into. Medicine is another example. Like medicine is going to be different, and you know, insurance companies didn't cover telehealth for mental health before COVID. Many of them are doing that now because it was a necessity, and suddenly you can do that. You can figure it out because the um, resistance to that was that it wasn't possible and you couldn't do that. Suddenly we figured out how to do some of that. So there's going to be so many changes to how some of these professions operate, and that's just the normal, I think, trajectory that we're on with the future of work in some of these industry sectors. And I think that's something that you should come in with some targets and ideas and goals of what you want, what you aspire to, and what inspires you. But you should be really curious about the opportunities that exist there and how that might change and evolve, because I think that might just result in you discovering something that you didn't know. And that's part of I think, yeah, the wonderful thing of coming to a place like Rochester is the discovery of new things that you weren't previously exposed to.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And that's such a great point about what you're saying in regards to when you start school, things can definitely look a little bit different when you graduate. And when I think about my own experience, when I started school and I was thinking about going into marketing at the time, all my classes and all of the conversations were about traditional media, right? But by the time that I was a senior and I was graduating, all of the opportunities were in digital media. So I had to quickly switch and learn a whole new set of skills that were thankfully transferable. But I think that's such a great point that you made, and something that students should really think about, especially as they enter their first year and start exploring and getting curious and trying different things out. So thanks for expanding on that.
Oh, my
All
pleasure.
right. All right. Well, it looks like it's 1 o'clock. So I want to thank everyone so much for joining us for another AMA. These are always so much fun. And thank you, Joe, for joining us.
No problem. Thanks, Danae. And I want to give a plug. Danae is not only responsible for all our marketing, communications, and social media in our office, she also is the amazing host of our Careers Unfiltered podcast. So check it out wherever you listen to your podcast, Spotify, Apple. She has some great interviews with alumni that I think are really just interesting and fascinating and a great way to learn about different careers and just the life stories of different people. So I think they're really cool. And I love that you continue to do those too.
Thanks. Yeah, I love that. Like, I love when you listen to a podcast and they always say, go listen to it wherever you listen to your podcast. Now, I feel really cool because I can say the same thing. So, whether you're a Spotify person or an Apple Podcast person, it's there. It's called Careers Unfiltered, produced by the Green Center. So, if you do take a listen, feel free to comment, send me an email, give us any feedback or suggestions on who you'd even like to listen to. I think that's awesome. Thanks, Joe, for the plug. Um,
Review the podcast as well.
yeah, rate and subscribe, you know the drill. Okay. Well, this has been so much fun. And again, thank you to everyone who joined us. And from the Green Center, we hope you're doing well, you're staying safe and healthy, and that you're enjoying your summer months. And we'll hopefully talk to you soon.
Thanks, Danae. I'll see you next month.
All right. See you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.